We talked last week about lifting other people up and serving the Lord in that way. I want to read this verse out of Hebrews chapter 10. I'm going to start with verse 23 to give myself just a little bit of momentum as we get to what we're talking about this morning. Hebrews chapter 10, starting with verse 23, it says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who promised is faithful." And then in verse 24, listen to this carefully. It says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So the Bible tells us that we are to encourage one another, and we are to love one another, and we are to, as we said last week, lift one another. Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And so we've been kind of focusing on that. And I want to think about it just a little bit more as we think about serving God and in the way that we serve each other. And we serve God and we love God by loving each other. And I just want to encourage us this morning to continue to serve, to continue to love, to continue to reach out. And sometimes we get discouraged when we're doing that because, I don't know about you, but do you ever feel like nobody sees what you do? I say, well, I want to do it, but it's hard sometimes when we feel like we're all alone. We feel like we're going through it and nobody really cares. But can I tell you one important thing? God cares, doesn't he? God sees it. God's asked us to serve. And so it helps us to serve when we recognize that God sees us. I was thinking about Noah. And Noah was quite a servant, wasn't he? He was asked to build an ark. Have you ever tried to build an ark? Okay, one of you. Just kidding. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of, we read over it and we say, well, yeah, Noah built the ark. Can you imagine how detailed that is? How many steps there are to it? I'm trying to redo a deck. And I think that there's more deck than earth. Every time I go to do so, oh man, there's so much of it. It takes so long. And here's Noah building and working. Nobody's really seems to be helping him that we know of. Nobody seems to be really thinking, well, that's a great idea, Noah. He's on his own. He's doing all this, and then the Lord puts him in the ship. He's got to take care of the animals. He's collected all the animals. I don't know if it's like doing children or not, but it's probably pretty difficult as they're running around. Hey, get over here. Where are you at? Why are you here? And he gets them all in the ark, and then it rains, and it rains, and it rains, and I know that being here in California, when it rains for a week in a row, how crabby everybody is. And it's raining forever. Oh. And here it is 40 days, and it's raining and raining and raining and raining and raining. And here's Noah. And I think of this verse in Genesis 8:1. It says, "But God remembered Noah." He hadn't forgotten him. I think maybe Noah might have thought that at times. Like, oh, God, do you really? Are you there? Do you know where I'm at? Do you know all the things I'm doing? Do you know what I'm going through? It says that God remembered Noah. He knew what he was going through. He had him in his plan. He was taking care of it all along. None of it was out of his sight. None of it was out of his control. And this morning, just remind you, God remembers you. You feel like you're building an ark today? You feel like it's rained for 40 days, 40 nights? You feel like your animals are scrambling? Nobody listens to you? Well, God remembers you. He hasn't left you. He knows what you're doing. He knows what you're going through. You may be overwhelmed by the circumstances, but you know what? God's not overwhelmed by circumstances. I think of Elijah in the Old Testament. Elijah went through famine. God told him there's going to be a famine. Elijah is the one that said it. He goes and he goes to the prophets. And he calls out the prophets of Baal. He's not a very popular guy. The whole nation is basically turned to Baal worship. They're not following him. I think as a spiritual leader, how discouraging that must have been for Elijah. He has a victory when he goes against the prophets of Baal, and God calls down fire, and they kill these prophets, and then what happens? Jezebel threatens his life. Now he's got a death threat against him. All these things are happening, and so he runs away. Do you feel like running away? Boy, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I could see why he wanted to get out of there. He just wanted to get a break. He just needed to get away. He just needed his own space, and so he goes down, and he's out in the desert. Did God forget him? It says God came and he met him. He spoke to him with a still small voice. He spoke to him. He said, Elijah, this is what you're to do. This is where you're to go. This is what you're to say. And by the way, I haven't forgot a lot of other people too. Others that serve me. I don't know about you, but it's pretty easy for me to relate to Elijah to say, God, I'm all by myself. Why don't you just kill me? And he says, you know what? I see you. I see you and I know you. And what you're doing matters. Because I've called you to it. He says, not because you're so great. It's not because you're the one that's doing it. He says, it matters because I've asked you to do it. So he says, I remember you. And what you're doing is important. What you're doing matters. Jesus said that even if we give a cup of cold water in his name, he said, well, it makes a difference, doesn't it? In the book of Acts, you realize the first deacons were chosen so that some could serve food. Do you think that was an important job? It was. It was an important job. It was a job that was helping to serve the Lord. It was helping to bring his kingdom forth. It was helping people who were in need. In the book of James, he says, here's some religion for you. He said, to help the widows and the orphans. It does matter. He says, it does matter what you do. See, sometimes we see things from our perspective. We say, well, if I'm doing something really important and really big, then it matters. But if I'm doing something little, it's not that big a deal. And God doesn't see it that way, does he? He says, what I've asked you to do, it matters. It's important. Sometimes we get tempted to, boy, if God could only save a superstar, then he could use that person and they would be able to just touch so many lives. And I think all the while God's saying, what I want to do is I want to use you. I want to use you. And I want you to be faithful to what I've asked you to do. And don't try to do something different. Don't try to do something more. The children this week, we learned a story about someone who says, don't do something that God hasn't gifted you for. Try to just be something you're not. He says, be the best you can be at what God asked you to be. And that's the most important job for you. It's the most important thing. I've always been impressed with a young guy I knew. He was saved, and he was very on fire after he got saved. He just wanted to do everything. And I watched him and I thought, yeah, that's nice, you know, he's wanting to do everything. He's really excited now, but will it last? Will it last? He was a very good-looking guy. He wanted to do all kinds of things, and he wanted to be involved in ministry. I said, oh, okay, great. So he's going to be involved in ministry, and all the girls are going to be, oh, and we think he's so cute, and we like him, and we follow him, and then, you know, is he really going to follow through? And his pastor asked him to do something. Instead of being a part of the youth ministry, asked him to go and do the rest home service. Well, if you've ever been to the rest home service, you know It's not very glamorous. There's not a lot of people there. The people that are there, some of them aren't awake. And some of the ones that are awake don't know what you said. And I thought, oh, that's great. He's going to do that. I said, that'll probably last about 3 weeks or so. He did it. He continued to do it. I was impressed. He did it for quite some time. It seemed like years. I don't know how long. One day I got a call from him. He said, Rob, can you help me? I said, sure. What's going on? He goes, I got to be out of town. I'm gone somewhere else. Can you go do my rest home service for me? Yeah, that's impressive. Because he said, that's what God has called me to do. Important thing. It matters. It's not very glamorous. You know what? Not too many people knew what he was doing. They had no idea that he was doing that every Sunday. He was taking his time. He was taking his effort. He was putting his heart into it. He cared about it. It wasn't just something he did just to make himself fit. He said, this is what God has called me to do. He's called me to reach these people. Can I tell you this morning? God, what he calls you to do, it matters. It makes a difference. And he calls you to do some things that aren't glamorous. But if he calls you to do it, that's what you need to do. And so what we're doing matters. As long as we're serving in humility, he said that he'll take care of the rest. He told us what kind of attitude to have as servants, He said, we're to say, oh, I'm not even a worthy servant. I just did what you asked me to do. Maybe we could say it, and I didn't even do it that well. I'm just honored to be able to try. He says, I'll take care of the results if you'll be faithful and realize that what I do matters. When I think of some of the things that Moses did, I think of him parting the Red Sea. Sometimes I tend to think, well, Moses must have been so great that he could part the Red Sea. You see the mistake there? It's not that Moses was so great. It's that he did what God asked him to do. He did what God asked him to do. And he said, that's what matters. And that's what I've got to do. My final question and thought as we think about serving is this. We need to serve because if we don't do it, who will? See, God is counting on you. He's chosen to use you in your life. And why would we want to serve? Because God's depending on me to do my part. I want to read a couple verses. The call of Isaiah from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. He's seen the Lord in all his glory, and then he says this, Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I. Send me. And God said to him, Go and tell this people. Be ever hearing and never understanding. Be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise, they would see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Isaiah, I want you to go. You're the one. Who's going to go? He says, Here am I. Send me. Give this message so that possibly they'll open their eyes. Possibly they're going to hear. Maybe they'll understand. And they'll be healed. Romans chapter 10, verses 14 and 15, very similar. It says this, How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they're sent? As it is written, How beautiful are the feet of him who brings good news. Folks, we can bring good news. We can preach in a lot of different ways, Kim. It's not just from the pulpit. We can bring that good news. We can send. We can be the ones. And if you don't do it, who will? He says, I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you. This phrase from the scripture, we sing it in a song, just echoed in my mind over and over. It's this. Keep on doing what you know is right. Keep on doing what you know is right. God sees it. He'll use it. And He's counting on you. Keep on doing what you know is right. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes this morning? I just pray that you would keep your heart open to Him this morning, to His Word, and just let Him speak to you.